Show started off with Seth Rollins coming out, and he went over last week's attack by the Fiend, but was quick to bring up that he had been mugged by 5 dudes last week beforehand. And then, all of a sudden, he has the living embodiment of a nightmare this close to my face. And I had no fight left in me, and I just had to close my eyes and hope it was a bad dream and I could wake up. But I realized it's not.
When he describes the imagery that way, like, I could see exactly what they're going for at the end of these shows, because it does kind of look like it's Seth Rollins, like, tucked in bed, you know, trying to, like, he's like a little child, basically, tucked in bed and, like, you know, sweating because he just had a big nightmare. And that's
Except he's a grown individual.
Well, yeah, that's really how it comes across.
What if he had to, like, lay in the corner and scream? What if he had to do that? That would have been ridiculous, right?
I wonder if that was. I mean,
I was
not expecting. I think from what we even got here, though, you know.
This almost felt like they had to. That like they felt last week Seth did too much selling and looked too weak. That they had to give him an out here.
Do you think so? Because he did the exact same thing on this.
Well, that's why the end of this show was so perplexing to me, because it felt like they spent the first 5 minutes of this promo explaining Seth out of that scene last week. Because he looked very weak for your top babyface that looked like he was cowering in fear to a man with a Halloween costume.
Right. I think the idea of having your champion, you know, be afraid of this thing called the Fiend, I don't think that's a bad idea. Maybe just in execution, there's
characters that can display fear. I don't know if Seth is that guy that you would want to put in that spot. It's very tough to present that as you are scared of the person opposite you.
Now, do you say that due to, like, Seth Rollins' acting ability, or just the fact that he's the champion?
A bit of both. He's not a good actor, and he is this would be Bret Hart, like, trembling at Papa Shango trying to perform voodoo on him.
Right. Would that have gone well? Like, the thing is, the Fiend is, you know, like, I don't want to say the boogeyman, okay, but, like, or I don't want to say the Sandman either, but you know what I mean. He's like a creature from your nightmares, and it requires almost your hero to kind of, like, sell as if that was the case. Like, what is, I think, a good way to do that, though, in the context of a professional wrestling event?
I think that there's a perfectly fine way of the Fiend constantly getting to this guy with the mandible claw, with Sister Abigail, and just constantly one-upping this guy, but without him having to sell the fear, but just he cannot figure this guy out, and this guy has Seth's number.
Right. It's, you know, I guess maybe part of it also has to do with the fact that he's a babyface, and typically, like, somebody cowering in fear like this, we usually see reserved for heels. Like, even with, like, all the Undertaker's opponents, you know, typically if he's kind of playing the demon nightmare type of guy, it's the villain that is, you know, scared and running away. To see a babyface do it, and, you know, especially your champion, may be a little bit unusual and maybe tougher to get used to.
And where do things go if, like, the Undertaker seems to me like we were talking about that idea recently, and one point I thought about after we did our review last week. That seemed fairly obvious after the fact is you have now given the storyline in for the Undertaker to go after this guy because he's now taken out Kane.
Yeah, sure. That's probably, like, you know, pretty.
That could be your end to Hell in a Cell, because they do have to get out of that match somehow if it's.
And you think Crown Jewel?
I mean, I expect Brock and the Undertaker and all the major guys to be on that show. That, I mean, when you're looking at opponents, it's a tough match to book, because what do you do unless you're going to go all the way with the Fiend and he gets a win over the Undertaker?
I could also see them holding back, like, the Fiend and the Undertaker, sort of like, you know, like a Final Destination, or, like, more so a WrestleMania level event, because that's, you know, I think something that everybody expects. But also, yeah, where do you go after that? Like, that to me almost screams actual retirement match for Taker, but I don't know. I feel like we're a little early, but then I think we're a little early even for this Rollins match.
Do you have a strong sense if they they actually go through and put the title on this character that is incredibly over right now.
I think they should. I think Rollins, he's been a good champion, a decent champion, but I think this makes it a lot more interesting.
Is there anything that separates Raw and SmackDown more than the possibility of Brock Lesnar and The Fiend as your champions?
Very different, yeah. I mean, very different tonally, sure. But I would say that also is interesting because you're talking about two champions that might make infrequent appearances.
That's true. I wouldn't want The Fiend showing up all the time. But
or do you have Bray Wyatt, like Mr. Rogers Bray Wyatt, carry the title and appear and cut promos?
Yeah, it's a really weird mix. I don't even think The Fiend needs the title, but you put him in this position now where you also don't want to see him lose. So you either do kind of a backwards finish to get out of it, or you go all the way with this guy, which, I mean, as a character, I give this guy an A+ for how they've rolled this out. Like, it's just been a stellar introduction and usage of this character so far.
They can get out of it, I think, as long as they deliver like some level of spectacle in that Hell in a Cell. Like, even if it ends in some type of weird finish, if they do something mind-blowing, spectacular visually, I think people will forgive it. So maybe he doesn't have to win.
This is the most analysis we have ever got out of the first two lines of my notes.